Welcome to today's podcast interview. I brought on Kim Corti. Kim, welcome.
Well, thank you for having me.
All right, this is going to be a good conversation and discussion all about emotions. But before we dive in, please give the listeners a little background. Where do you live and what do you do?
I live in Northern California, and I am a perception and emotion management strategist, which basically means I work with you for a bespoke approach to help you specifically work on whatever it is and give you a strategy.
I think emotions are so nuanced and there's so many angles we could go in with this. So, can
Right.
we just start at the bottom and let's just define what emotions are and what triggers them?
So emotions are literally an electric signal that gets produced, a chemical signal that gets produced by the brain and is felt by the body. There's these little peptides. And so things going on in your environment will create this physical response versus feelings, which is our conscious awareness of that emotion. And then we feel it. So an emotion can be multiple things because it's this system called interoception. I don't know if anyone knows that emotions are a sensory system. And so when we are hungry, that is an emotion because the body has sent that peptide, that emotion to the body for you to feel and notice that you're hungry. And it could be tired and it could be love and it could be sad and it could be mad. So those are emotions and feelings are our conscious awareness of them.
Can we better differentiate? Can we name some emotions and name some feelings so you can, um, I feel like they're so
They're the
connected.
same. So the emotion is the chemical reaction in the body. That's like when you feel the sensation inside of you, like your stomach is grumbling. And then the emotion is how we label it. That's when we connect to the feeling and we say, "Oh, I'm hungry," or "Oh, I'm anxious," or "Oh, I'm sick." So that's where labeling our emotions becomes so critical.
Okay.
Does that
Now,
make sense?
yes. Can we get into, again, there's so many avenues. I'm like, where do I go with this? But here's what
Right?
I want to ask. I feel like, or what I experience, and especially with a lot of my coaching clients, and as a society, we have suppressed emotions or we're living in states because we actually become addicted, right? Like we become addicted to stress, worry, fear, lack, even sometimes the victim mentality. So let's start one. What happens when we suppress and don't feel the emotion?
So that is a lack of interoceptive awareness, right? So you push it down. And I know this because I suffered from childhood sexual abuse. I had some other things that happened in life. So I was the queen of pushing emotions down. And what happens is then we start to confuse and not understand when they get really loud because emotions can only be suppressed for so long and then they get really loud and then they go boom, right? And then you're like, oh, I can remember back before I really became cognitively connected to my childhood sexual abuse, just crying all the time. Like I would walk with my sister-in-law and I just felt so sad. And there was something that happened to trigger that. My mom brought it up, the event that happened. And then I was just sad all the time and I had not emotionally connected to the event, and yet my body was feeling it and I couldn't connect it.
Mhm.
So that is because I had pushed it down and I didn't know that feeling. But you push down other things too. Like I always thought I had something wrong with me. Maybe, my stomach was always bothering me and I had female reproductive issues and I associated that to being sick when it really wasn't it. It was in my unresolved, my lack of attention to an emotion.
Yeah.
So that is my personal example, a big, obviously extreme example, but it can be as simple as, not connecting to the difference between your different emotions. You can have a variation, just like a pepper can be mild or sweet or so spicy it burns your mouth. Our emotions have gradations and they have differentiations in them from love to hate. And so when we can identify the feelings in those different middle states, that gives us more resilience and it gives us more what is called interoceptive awareness, which is really just emotional awareness. But I like to educate people that emotions are a sensory system. So just to say, oh, emotional awareness, no, it's a sensory system in your body, just like seeing and hearing.
I think, well, and I want to get your opinion, but there seems to be a misperception that they're bad emotions. And I don't see what I'm thinking about right now is the emotional guidance scale. This is something Abraham Hicks always talks about, and that there's a spectrum. I don't see anger or fear as bad. I always think of, for me, myself, when I'm feeling an emotion or I'm triggered, I actually step into a space of curiosity. What is this bringing up for me? So, would you label emotions as good or bad?
Glad you asked that because I say this all the time. Emotions aren't positive or negative, only the outcomes. Because you can be in love and keep falling in love with the same jerk or the same person. I won't even say jerk. I'll just say the same person who is not a healthy choice for you. And that's because, and I talk about this in my book about our definitions for what it takes for us to feel a certain emotion. Like it's up to us to define the actions and and what has to happen for us to feel something. And that is part of our awareness, but it's also part of giving our brain more information and giving it what it needs to do a better job at predicting how we feel.
Something's coming to mind. I saw this meme quite some time ago, but it said that the longest journey any human will ever take is the 14 inches from their head to their heart. In other words, we're so stuck up here, and that's what creates a lot of chaos and stress and anxiety. And we're so disconnected from our body and our emotions. Can we talk about how to create that connection? And even let's talk about the term emotional intelligence.
Sure, happily. Now, this is this is not something, and especially from doing so many podcast interviews, that people really uh, understand necessarily or relate to. But we, um, I'm sorry, I'm kind of I'm kind of trying to think about the best way to say this. So we don't think of our body as a communication tool. So if you were to put, you know, something over your ears or over your eyes so that you didn't feel or you didn't hear, you didn't see, then yes, you would have problems, right? And so when we talk about emotions, that's not just the heart, it is the whole body because we feel emotions in our whole body because the brain is giving us this information, this communication. So, yes, it seems like a long walk from the head, and I'm going to say not just the heart, but the whole body. And yet, it's what's keeping us back. Like, if you were to pick one emotion that keeps us from having that connection, what would you pick? I'm
You're
asking
asking
you.
me,
Yeah.
what one emotion keeps us from what?
From connecting to the body, to connecting, to taking that journey from the head to the heart or the head to the body. Like, what would you guess that is the one major emotion that would halt us from wanting to do that?
Well, the one furthest away would be fear.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And fear is such a control mechanism for our emotions. So if you think about if you're in fear, you're like this, and you're only looking at the object of your fear. So in when we taste food, it's not flavor. It's just the sense of taste. But when we capture flavors, we're using multiple sensory systems. And so when we experience emotions, it too is multiple sensory systems that produces the emotion. So if we're in fear of something, we're just going to be looking at the object of fear and not have, as you pointed out, curiosity about why we feel that way or what is going on in this situation that is uh, producing this emotion. And I know you wanted to talk about that show, and I'll get into this more, but we take in these ingredients to produce our emotional responses. Just and if we're afraid of them, then we're always going to keep getting the same ones. We're going to keep repeating and focusing and getting that same response because we're not allowing ourselves to learn more about the situation, to maybe potentially see it differently, and then relabel it into something that's not so fear inducing. So our fears is really the greatest thing that keeps us from going from our head to anywhere in our body.
Well, it keeps us in fight or flight, or what like Dr. Joe Dispenza calls it, living in survival mode. And when we're living
Yep.
in survival mode, that's what creates dis-ease, immune
Hmm.
dysfunction, and all the problems in our life.
Yep.
Okay,
Yep.
so now let's talk about emotional intelligence. What does that mean, and how do we live in that more curiosity and self-awareness piece so that we are in the driver's seat of our life and not living in constant reactive mode?
I I look at, and I'm just going to say it from my point of view, emotional intelligence. So if you think about what is deemed intelligence, it's learning, right? It's being an active learner in whatever field. So if you want to have emotional intelligence, it's really understanding yourself, understanding why you feel a certain way, and maybe redirecting it and relabeling it as something else. So it's only when we are self-examining and more aware that we have the ability to have the emotional education about ourselves. And I always tell people, like, if you look at anybody or any species, like, nobody was built to learn more than the human. Yep, there are animals who learn, but they kind of hit a shelf. We have this infinite capacity to learn. As long as we live, we can keep learning and keep expanding our mind and our education about ourselves. And it's the emotional intelligence about ourselves and our emotions is what gives us confidence and makes better decisions. Because decision making is driven more by emotion than by logic. Because I know a lot of people like to say, oh, I made a really logical decision. But in the end, it's how you feel about that decision that's really driving it.
Well, and any good brand and company knows in marketing, when you
Yep,
use emotion, that is what drives people to buy.
exactly. Exactly.
Okay, so
So
what you were just talking about, let's talk about the reverse, and I'm going to bring that show in. So now let's talk about people who lack self-awareness, and which what I'm trying to say is kind of living in that victim mentality, pointing the finger and blaming other people and external forces and whatever for our emotional state. So the example I gave you in the pre-call was there's this show on Netflix called Love is Blind, and they were on the reunion, and one of the couples didn't work out, and she was blaming the guy for breaking her heart, and he destroyed her. What would you say to that?
I would say that would you blame him for seeing what she sees? Does she blame him for the smells in the air, what she hears? We are responsible for interpreting whatever it is that we bring into our sensory systems. And so all anything, anyone, or anybody, or any environment is giving us this sensory input, and it's us. We are the ones who create the emotional responses. So that's like saying, I I'm going to jump in and change how you see this. It's like I'm going to take responsibility for how you see this red rose. You can't. It's a weird thing to think about, but our whole world is in our head.
Yeah.
And it's the weirdest thing, but it's true. Like we don't see with our eyes, we don't do anything with any of our sensory systems. Our brain tells us. So if we don't like how we feel, it's not their fault. They gave you the ingredients, but you did with it what you wanted. You created, I like to say, you cooked up your recipe, and you may have missed all kinds of great ingredients that you could have used to cook up something different emotionally. And that is why it's literally impossible to blame somebody else for how you feel, because they can't jump inside of your mind, they can't jump inside of your body, unless that is they're, you know, pinching you. I mean, that's a different sort of situation, but we're talking about emotionally their actions. It's our response.
And what I shared with you, I heard this years ago, and I think it was by Kyle Cease, but he said, nobody broke your heart, they broke your expectations. And so, what
Right.
you were just sharing in that note, our perceptions are what drive our emotions, right? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, perceptions drive emotions more than thought does.
And so, if we're how we perceive something, so through our lens, which a lot of times is based on past experiences, we are projecting that and trying to blame somebody else when it's a perceptual misperception, right?
Right. So look at it this way. I like to use this as an example. So if you think of a memory is perception, what was going on at the time and how you felt about it, because how you feel about it is a sensory system. And so your brain, from the time we're born, we learn what anything means. It's always making meaning of all this incoming data. So what does it use? It uses our memories. Call it past experiences, call it beliefs, call it a memory. It's all the same thing. And so when any incoming information's coming in, it's using it not only to identify, like you, Heather, like now before I met you, I had this prediction in my brain that you were going to be a woman. And now that I have more detail as to what you look like, my brain would know if I saw you again, and especially if I saw you on a regular basis, oh, that's Heather, because I have that memory in my head. But I'm also going to have how I felt about my time with you in my head. And so this is what your brain is using, and I call them recipes. So imagine like in your brain is this huge room of recipes. And so the brain's like, okay, what is this most like? What is similar to this? And then it creates a prediction. And this is for every sensory system. It creates a prediction, and then we have the experience. We see, we feel, we smell, all of that. And that's why we have prediction errors. Like I could run into someone who looks similar to you, but and go, hey, Heather, and then get a second glance. And it's like, oops, that's not Heather. And that's because our brain predicted. And then we were able to update the prediction after we discovered our mistake.
Something that came to mind only because this was an experience in this last week, and I want to talk about with our emotional state and becoming more self-aware, how do we take our power back so we're not so reactive? And I'll give a real world example. So last weekend, um, somebody said something and it really triggered two individuals, and those individuals felt that this person was disrespectful and arrogant and what an ass he was. I was also in this group chat and I took a step back and my perception and my experience, but I do a lot of personal development. I didn't take it personal. I had that 30,000 foot overview. I knew what he was doing, but they got offended and all upset where I wasn't bothered by it. So can we talk about those dynamics and how we can not be so reactive and take our power back?
Okay, so let's dissect that from a perceptive standpoint. So they were focusing on, was this verbal or written?
Text.
Text. Okay, sorry, I couldn't remember. So they were focusing on particular words and even potentially what those words mean to them. And so they might not be looking at intention or their overall like interactions with this person. They could have potentially tried to seek clarification because what do you mean by that? Like, I'm sorry, I need some more better understanding of what you're saying because this is how I'm taking it, allowing for clarification. So instead of saying, why do I feel this way? And you probably should look at like what words bothered you and what do those words mean to you, because that's your how you're taking it, your experience with that word, and allowing them to define what that means for the person saying it. So to me, these are all just ingredients. And that's why I like to use that kind of metaphors of food and cooking and eating, because our emotional palate is defined by our recipes that we have in our head. And we might taste something and think it's a certain way. In fact, I'm going to give you a true story. It's chapter 1 in my book. I was at a party and this man came in. He was late, really late, and it was his friend's party. It was a pre-New Year's Eve party, and his friend had all these beautiful wines because I live in the wine country, but I've always enjoyed wine. And he the friend he saw a bottle of Opus One, which is a very fancy wine. He took a taste of it and said, "Oh, I love this wine." And we're all laughing. And he's like, "What's going on?" And so he took another taste. He goes, "This isn't Opus One." And we were like, yeah. And his friend, who was the host, he goes, "You idiot." He's like, "I poured 2 Buck Chuck, the Trader Joe's brand that's now $4.99, but at the time was $1.99." He said, "We drank that Opus, which is a super high-end wine, a long time ago. You're late. So I filled it up with a little bit of 2 Buck Chuck because I knew you would go for it." And so that wine was the same. It was just that his brain predicted based on his expectations. It predicted based on the fact of what that bottle and what it meant to him. So we do this all the time. And so that's why I go back to what that word meant, because what they predicted might not be the actual experience if they reread it or asked for clarification.
So what you really highlighted, I got out of it two things. And again, because two individuals can have the same be in the exact same experience and have two totally different outcomes, right? But what you
Mhm.
really highlighted were the meanings we give things and our perception. So
And our predictions.
if we just pay more attention to the meanings we give things and our perception, and if we're feeling bad, if we're discouraged, if we're in doubt, if we're in fear, how can we reframe and turn that around so that we can create ideal outcomes?
So I like to say, look at what your current recipes are. So what has to happen for you to feel that emotion? And when you look at it in so I when I first learned about this process, I learned about looking at a lot of the emotions, like the emotions you want to feel more of and the emotions that you want to feel less of, and you start to see conflict where you're trying to not feel this and it's helping you to not feel the ones you want. So by understanding those ingredients, it kind of helps you to get to where you want to go. But even if you looked at it from just the standpoint of one emotion, what happened in there? What was it that was said in those words? Like, what was it that has happened in your past that makes you feel that way for that word
Yeah.
or words? And you might see that it's like just this automatic reaction that we have, right? Because this whole thing, and Dispenza, I'm sure, talks about this too. Like I said, I don't know everything he talks about, but it's the whole iceberg that Freud talked about, and that our brain would be gigantic if we were conscious in every moment, but because it's not, and it's energy efficient for it to use our memories. So when we're responding in a certain situation, look back. What happened that created that response? Like, what has to happen? Because that person just used words. So what does that word mean? And what has to happen for you to feel that? Because it's more likely us than someone else, but even when it is someone else, we still have the ability to control how we respond to them
Well, and what you're
and
really
update our
talking about,
recipes.
what you're really talking about in that example is our triggers. And again, when you become curious to your emotional reactions and do some of the self-inquiry, that is how we can free and liberate that stuck energy, right?
Yeah, yeah. Have you heard of uh Byron Katie?
Yeah, the work.
Yeah, so she has a nice little couple of questions to ask yourself. Is it true? Is it really true? And how does it feel if it's true? And how would it feel if it wasn't true? And I think those are some just good basic questions to ask yourself. And then I would say, what made it true for you is as an additional question. Like, what made that statement so true for you? And I always feel it's super important to ask clarifying questions to find out intention, because I know very few people, probably especially in a group like you would be leading, or in a group, group of yours, that you would have someone who is a completely horrible, uh, trying to offend a bunch of people in a group chat.
Yeah. Okay, I want to shift it a little bit. We've been talking a lot about perception and emotion management, but for
Mhm.
whatever reason, this is coming to mind, so I'm going to go with it.
Okay.
When we're talking about manifesting, and I don't believe manifesting at all is woo-woo. Science
No,
literally shows how thoughts become things, and we are all manifesting every single day. But I like to teach people how to do it by design rather than by default,
right.
unconscious and autopilot. There is so much emphasis in manifestation on the emotional piece. Can you talk more about that and why is it? I mean, I understand the learnings that I've learned through it and my own experimentation, but why are emotions such a huge component when it comes to creating the desires and outcomes we want?
Because emotions are what inform us about what we want and what we don't want, what's important, what's trivial, what needs our attention, what doesn't. It's an information system. It is literally how we communicate with our mind. It truly is. And so and I know you said, oh, we've been talking about perceptions, but they go hand in hand. And so if going back to focus, and if, let's just say, I'll give an example. Let's do it this way. Back when Teslas first came out, my husband and I took a test drive. And man, I loved that car. I have never ever driven a car as wonderful as that Tesla. I mean, that thing drove. It was amazing. It was just a fantastic car. Now, all of a sudden, I am seeing Teslas in my little town, because I don't live in a like 100,000 people, 120,000 people in our whole county, let alone like in my little town is like 80,000. And so I saw so many Teslas that I was like, did their sales go up overnight? it our emotions drive our focus. And so if you want to manifest something, it's helping you to focus on the things that you want, not what you don't want. Because when you don't want something and you're focused on that, that's what you get more of because that's what you see more of. That's what you experience more of. So in a lot of ways, it's so simple and yet, people like, I know what you were saying, like it's woo woo. Well, no, not really, because it wasn't like there was a miracle and more Teslas showed up, right?
Yeah.
No. So that's why it's so important. And that's why you get more of what you want because you're focused on more of what you want. And then and and I'm sorry, but it's an energy that we produce in our body. The heart sends out signals. It's the greatest generator of electromagnetic energy. And guess what? We use for communication, electromagnetic energy. So now we're sending that out from our body. And that to me is what is the factor that brings it in because we're communicating it to the world.
I won't get too deep into quantum physics today, but that's what I love understanding. Like, I wanted to understand the science behind manifestation. But what's coming to mind and what I see a lot is resistance. And again, resistance are emotions as well, but those resisting emotions that are actually repelling what you want are doubt, fear, stress, worry, feeling unworthy and not enough. And so, our society and culture has programmed that if you just work harder and you struggle and effort, you will get the thing. But what I've come to experience and realize that when you're working hard, you've created the resistance based on that emotional aspect. When you can get your emotions in check and move up that emotional guidance scale, because the thing you want, you have to connect with that like energy. So, for example, dating and relationship. If you want a relationship, think the end emotions would be love, gratitude, joy, connection. But when we're in a space of wanting, lack, feeling unworthy, we are so disconnected from our end result based on the emotional state, right?
Right. And it's all the difference in how people connect to you too. So like if you're going out on a date and you're like, oh, I want to be out on a date because I really want love, but nobody really can love me. I'm totally unlovable. Well, people feel that.
Yep.
Your heart, you, like I said before, you generate that energy. And I know from myself, like when I go into a room, when I'm running a workshop, if I'm working with people or a group, I know I'm going to take the lead in the energy of that room. And it's intentional. And I can turn people and I can turn a room because it's intentionally coming from me. And so that goes back to fear to me. I think it's underlying love or fear. If you love yourself, then you're gonna want the best for you. If you're afraid, then you are not because you have made up, and this is the predictive mind, and that's why I'm like, oh, Kim, you're just predicting, but don't necessarily believe it. Just like I would mistake you, like I told you about mistaking you in a crowd. I mean, that's a prediction error. So knowing the frailty of our brain that it can make us afraid of something and then all of a sudden we're like, "Oh wait, I didn't need to be afraid of that." Is because we didn't engage curiosity and we didn't, I think, have that love that gives us that confidence for us to be curious.
What you highlighted there was, again, this is not intellectual. This is like the feeling and the intuitive aspect of us. We've all experienced being around somebody and like just their energy, you don't want to be around them. So the example you gave, that needy stage 5 clinger energy is repulsive
Yes.
versus we've all
Well,
experienced,
Uh, I was just going to say it's repulsive unless you're one of those people who wants a needy person. And then you got to wonder, like, "Ooh, who
yeah,
wants a needy person?"
and
So
we have
go
two
ahead. Sorry.
codependents, blah. But
Yeah, right.
and we've also experienced somebody with really magnetic energy. You can't quite, but you just are drawn to them. And so again, this is an emotional state. When you understand, okay, so maybe now can we give a highlight? Do you have a practical tool or framework to help individuals better manage their emotions so that they stay forward focused and get more of what they want and less of what they don't want?
So I talk about this in my book, and I haven't, it's called Yucky, Yummy, Savory, Sweet, Understanding the Flavors of Emotions. And I use food metaphors for a real perfect reason, in that we have emotions around food. So if you're afraid of your emotions, if you go, let's get you more comfortable with them. So have more of a sensory experience with your food. Notice what you like about what you just ate. Can you identify some of the ingredients? How did it feel going into your body? How did it feel after you ate it? Was it a spicy dish? Was it too salty? Kind of like just self-examining your food and your food experiences, or what you put into a recipe. You're making something and you take a taste of it. Can you identify when, it's right or not right, if it needs something else or if it doesn't? Like that is a sensory experience that incorporates feeling, that unless you have a eating disorder, which I don't know that my book would be the best for you, but it would give you that connection to your body. And then you start to translate that to situations where you're like, oh, what you had that text or whatever. And then it gives you that moment to look back later on and say, okay, what was going on? And then you start to get better at it so that in the moment you notice this feeling come up and you're able to have the confidence to not be afraid and say, ooh, I have this feeling. What's going on right now, so that you can in the moment take your focus from this, from narrow to wide, and allow your perceptive powers to get more incoming ingredients for you to have potentially a different recipe outcome, or at least label it differently consciously so that your brain can use that in the future when a similar situation appears.
So is what you're saying, it really is the self-awareness piece, but paying attention
Absolutely.
when you feel good and empowered to pay attention. What were my thoughts? What were my emotions? What was everything going on so that we can replicate?
Or to change, more
Right.
importantly. I think that we fall too quickly into these, fear, love, and we
Right.
forget about, things like I've got a crush. I'm Twitter pated. I really like somebody. I'm enamored. I mean, there's all different kinds of emotions. There's a an app called Word Hippo, our hippo word. If you look up word hippo, I think it comes up. But it will give you similar words in their meaning to help give you, it's called emotional granularity,
Mm.
able to have different words that you can feel, different emotions that you can feel. Because if you only have like a few, it's the difference between having Italian recipe book that has 100 versus 1,000 or even 5,000. They Most Italian recipes have similar ingredients, and yet each recipe is distinct. And so having that kind of distinction in our emotions is a game changer. I'm telling you, it's a game changer.
Curious to know, what are some of your daily rituals that you practice and implement to keep you top of mind, conscious, and aware?
So you got to know I've been doing this for a while. So I will say I pay attention. Like there's a certain feeling in my stomach, or that comes like a heat that from my gut and my heart. And I'm like, oh, what am I feeling here? And then I will pay more attention to what's going on. That is when I go, what look around, what are you hearing? What are you seeing? What's going on here? And I also practice, like you said, like noticing when I respond because I'm tired or hungry. I may quickly respond because those impact our emotions. And I now will go, oh, um, sorry, honey. I was really tired and I shouldn't have responded the way that I did. But let me tell you what was underlying this. And this was why I responded poorly, but this was what was going on. And then I'm better able to communicate my feelings and respond in a little bit better mode. So we can't negate the fact that our physical condition impacts our responses.
Yeah. Emotions are so nuanced, and this
Mhm.
topic, we barely scratched the surface. But what we did talk about today, is there one key takeaway you want listeners to get, or something that they can apply and implement into their life now to better manage emotions, to be more emotionally intelligent?
One of the biggest things I think is just because you feel it, it doesn't mean it's true. It doesn't mean it's accurate. And back to you receive the ingredients and what you do with it is up to you. So you don't produce other people's emotions, but you might be able to be better at giving them more ingredients so that, you know, more words, bigger actions, something that communicates so that they know. But even still, you can't control what other people feel, and that you can't blame anyone else for how you feel. It's yours and you own them. And they're not always true.
Yeah. I think that's so important and top of mind to remember. And even the same with thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
Thoughts are not truth, right? Especially all those negative narratives. Thoughts are not truth.
Well, once again, underlying most thoughts, the majority of our thoughts is an emotion because thoughts are a product of our experience.
Yeah.
And what do our experiences contain?
Emotion.
Emotions.
Yes. Oh my goodness. Here's what I want to do. Just, I know we're short on time. To wrap up the interview, I have a few rapid fire questions for you.
Okay.
What is a quote or motto that you live by?
Oh, I just said it. Yeah, you can't believe everything you think or feel.
On this topic, I know you named one earlier, but on this topic, what is a book that you currently are reading or highly recommend?
Emotional agility, but I also like this book. If you can take some science, it's sorry, Being You. It's a really good book, but you kind of have to be okay with science. But I really like it by Anil Seth. And Susan David is the author of Emotional Agility.
Final question. What advice would you give your younger self?
Every experience is there for you to learn and, take from it something so that you grow from it. It's easy to be upset and hold on to anger and all of that other stuff. But it's better and more productive if you grow from it.
I love the saying, grow through what you go through.
Yes.
Kim, such a great note to end on. And thank you so much for joining me today and having this conversation.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.